Plasma Sword. Out of all the failed proof of concepts for licensed products out there in the world, it's my favorite. And it's a solid game to boot. Plasma Sword, Nightmare of Bilstein, a.k.a. Star Gladiator 2, Nightmare of Bilstein, was made for the Sony ZN2 in 1998, which was another PlayStation-based arcade board, and then upported and released on the Dreamcast in 1999 and 2000. Plasma Sword is also the sequel to Star Gladiator Episode 1, Final Crusade, no alias, which itself was made for the ZN2's predecessor, the ZN1. And while Star Gladiator was Capcom's first bold step into 3D modeled fighting games full of vim and ambition, Plasma Sword is the product of years of experience and bitter resignation, or so I've been told. But Plasma Sword's a stellar game all the same. It's a 3D fighting game with fixed movement, and it has a 4-button setup. Characters can either dash or run towards or from the opponent, although they'll automatically dash when they're close, and skid if you try to run towards opponent up close. There are 3 attack buttons: horizontal slashes, vertical slashes, and kicks, mapped to A, B, and K respectively, and a movement button marked as M, which handles sidestepping, rolling, and teching from knockdowns. Sidestepping is the only way to move into the foreground or background, but it's an option all the same. That's why it's a 3D game. Each fighter has traditional directional input special moves, dashing moves, and command moves, as well as their own set of preset combo strings named Plasma combos. There's a lot of things named Plasma in this game. Most Plasma combos can be cancelled into a special move before the last hit. Lots of the strings branch at one point or another, chaining into moves with unique properties. A and B strings tend to be the longest, and K strings tend to be the shortest, with branching strings being somewhere in between those two in length. But that's a broad generalization. Some characters specialize in one type of attack, such as kicks, and as such, there's no hard rule about how any given Plasma combo should work. There are also opened and closed stances, much like a common 3D fighting game, and a universal command move that causes characters to switch hands. A character's stance can modify lots of moves, usually causing those moves to swing or hit at the opposite direction or in different arcs. Like most open and closed stance concepts in 3D fighting games, it's not terribly important, but it can come in handy every now and then. There are also pursuit attacks, performed by pressing up and either A or B for a strong pursuit attack, or up and K for a weak pursuit attack. The strong ones have much wider ranges and steeper arcs of descent, and do more damage, but the weak ones are quicker and take less time to finish. Unlike many other fighting games with pursuit attacks, fighters will miss their pursuits if their opponents are standing or even while they're rising, so in some cases you have to actually plan for the pursuit attack in order to land it. Speaking of arcs, I might as well point out that there are also jump attack variants. Before the apex of a jump, pressing up on an attack button will throw out a unique rising jump attack, whereas pressing an attack button as your character falls activates the usual type of jumping attack. Rising jump attacks do a bit more damage compared to falling jump attacks, and can be used as preemptive anti-airs or even combo filler, but they're just as vulnerable as any other normal striking move. Blocking is handled in the usual way. You hold back or down back, and crouching blocks will block most standing attacks, although they're vulnerable to jumping attacks and some standing command moves or plasma combo strings. Interestingly enough, while throws beat out both types of blocking, crouching throws tend to have different animations, but there's no high-low aspect to it. You just press A and B together, and the opponent is thrown no matter what. It's a nice visual flourish. And finally, there are the plasma moves. This is the part of the video where I may just very well make you all hate the word plasma forever. First up is the plasma reverse, a type of counter move that can be used against A or B attacks. It's a carryover from the original Star Gladiator, and there are 2 versions of this move, the Revenge version and the Reflect version. Revenge is used, and that doesn't read right. No, whatever. Revenge is used by pressing A and M at the same time, and it's a straightforward counterattack that knocks the opponent down. Reflect is used by pressing B and M, and stuns the opponent for about a second or so. Each version uses half a bar of meter, and both are vulnerable to throws and kicks. Plasma strikes are basically super moves. They all cost 1 level of meter, and the plasma power gauge can hold 3 levels, so meter management isn't terribly difficult. Everyone uses the same commands for their super: quarter circle forward or quarter circle back, and A and B together. And each character only has 2 supers, with 1 corresponding to each respective motion. In fact, those 2 supers are the only things that really separate the majority of the cast from one another, as nearly half of the characters in the roster have the exact same moves as their counterparts. Functionally, Plasma Sword has 14 characters and 10 EX characters with different models and story modes. And the thing people used to complain about Akuma and Evil Ryu, Plasma Sword basically has an entire collection of elaborate evil variants. Then again, the game didn't do so well in terms of popularity, and that's probably one of the reasons why. Anyway, there's another super move called the Plasma Field. It's basically a universal power-up move, and each pair of characters gains a different set of abilities when it's used. Plasma Fields are activated by pressing B and K. They cause a short burst of energy, not unlike the Team Supers from the Rival School series, and when it hits, it locks both fighters in a giant cube. Kind of like the Psychic Force games, now that I think of it. Between the similarities in wireframe and the similarities between the original arcade board specs, I'm starting to get the impression that Sony had a lot more to do with the 90s fighting game boom than most people realize, myself included. Laser cannons, growth spurts, energy surges, element manipulation, there's a lot of gimmicks involved. Plasma fields can be activated on the ground or during mid-jump, and once the field connects with vulnerable opponents, it launches them and then causes them to fall into a juggle state. Users who are on the ground can attack immediately, although characters who used it in the air are forced into a special falling state before they can make another move. Plasma fields are blockable, however, and when they're blocked, the user is open to attack. That said, they crush plasma reverses and most specials and supers. It's just regrettable that the plasma field effects themselves are also the same between characters. Like, the only thing that separates one character from their alternative is the supers. Just the supers and the model work. Which isn't to say that the models are easy to make, but still. If there's one word that pops into my head when I play this game, it's streamlined. The fact that the game uses preset combos, cancelable chains, and inputs that only involve singular motions, double taps, and button presses gives me the impression that Capcom's goal was to make the game easier to play than most others. Especially since Plasma Sword was overseen by a few of the planners and programmers who worked on the Rival School series, which definitely felt like it had a smoother learning curve than most fighting games overall. But if there's an actual sentence that pops into my head when I play this game, it's, "This game was made by the B team, I just know it." The menus are plain and the backgrounds are endless scrollers. And I know that's another part of it being a 3D/2D Capcom fighting game from the 90s, but it's especially rough here because these particular backgrounds are so distinct and static. At least the other games, like Street Fighter EX2, had broader and less specific backdrops. Still, I can put up with the stages because I like the game that much, even though I know some people become figuratively or literally sick at seeing endlessly scrolling stages. I also know that between Star Gladiator and Plasma Sword, Star Gladiator is actually the fan favorite. And I can see where people come from when they say that. It was much more novel, as it was a full-fledged weapon-based fighting game, and one of Capcom's first 3D fighting games to boot, because it was handled by Capcom in-house, and predates Capcom's collaboration with Arika on Street Fighter EX by a few months. I mean, I don't actually know which one preceded the other internally in development, but I know that one was finished before the other, so... Some even say that it was Capcom's attempt to get in on the weapon fighter craze, and I don't doubt it. Star Gladiator was completely dedicated to being a proper weapons-based fighter, and used every convention of that subgenre that was present at the time. Quick rises, special combo enders, ring outs, stuff like that, but with Capcom's own little spin on each of those ideas. The plasma combo system, for example, was originally much more uniform. The idea was that each fighter used one of 3 types of combo strings, each emphasizing A, B, or K strings, and all of which had specific 5-hit strings, denoted in a little gauge on the screen that you could use to keep track of each hit. The gimmick even went as far as to have secret combos that went beyond 5 inputs, causing the gauge to fill up with a word as the technique was completed. Another example would be the universal turnaround move. In Star Gladiator, it not only switches hands, but actually forces the opponent to turn around on hit too, leaving them open from attack from behind. They could block it or attack afterwards, of course, but they would actually have to wait a little bit while they were in stun, whereas a person who landed the attack could attack immediately. But for all its ambition and its excellent attention to detail, there's one thing that sets Star Gladiator apart from Plasma Sword. One thing that gives Plasma Sword the edge. In the end, Plasma Sword just works. I'm not going to start getting a swelled head just for going against the grain, but I have to point out that a lot of the interesting stuff in Star Gladiator is undermined by how poorly it handles axes, specifically horizontal movement. It's not only strict, it's also slow, and drags the game down considerably. I mean, I know this sort of thing is subjective. I'm not going to get into hit stun or anything like that, but I feel that the way the game handles horizontal movement and circling the opponent is an active detriment. The fact that it takes so much effort to recenter your line of sight manually if you hit someone slightly off center means that the plasma combo mechanic, for example, has to come to a screeching halt if you don't start from the best position possible. Not just for the secret combos with the supers at the end, but even the basic strings, the ones that are supposedly guaranteed the hit, the ones that are quick enough to hit in at least 2 or 3 hits. And the problems are compounded when you consider that a few of the mechanics depend on that very sort of axis management, the thing that the game doesn't handle so well. A specific instance would be the Plasma Reverse, which is way stricter in Star Gladiator than it is in Plasma Sword. Originally, each version was color-coded, and only worked on either an A attack or a B attack. Use the wrong counter against the wrong type of attack, and you end up with a smack to the face. Furthermore, you could only get a counter attack off of one type of attack, and you could only get an intentional stun off of the other, which means that you had to hope that your opponent was obvious enough to hit with the type of attack you wanted to get the result you wanted. And with the aforementioned complaint about character aiming, well, you can see how things can get annoying very quickly. That's why, even though Star Gladiator is the more interesting game on paper, I think Plasma Sword is the stronger entry. It's a lot simpler than Star Gladiator, and it mostly introduces stuff from Capcom's other fighting games, but its generous hitboxes and proper use of character tracking makes everything gel together, and to me, that's more important. It's not even as if it does a tremendously fantastic job of tracking, mind you. It just does a much better job of it than its predecessor, which emphasizes that stuff to begin with. But in all honesty, I could have covered both games, and in a roundabout way I kinda did. The Star Gladiator series was born when Capcom was really starting to cut their teeth on 3D modeling and deformation in the mid to late 90s, and serves as an excellent showcase of what they were capable of doing when they wanted to experiment. Plus, it was one of their few story-heavy series with strong continuity to it, so much so that some characters didn't even make it from one game to the other. All that's enough to make it memorable. The fact that we got a solid game out of it is pure gravy.